How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to Boylai Hobby Time. I actually started this project last year, so at some point in this video the footage jumps from 8 months ago to this last week. Let me know if you can spot where that happens. I chose this giant wooden block because it opens up and has plenty of space to hide all of my weapons. And by weapons, I mean my collection of miniature lightsabers and Star Wars blasters that I've collected over the years of building Bondi kits. I thought it would be funny to make one of those classic secret weapon racks like you'd see in all the spy movies, but this one is a Star Wars replica weapon closet from a Star Wars fan whose landlord has a very strict no-cosplay policy. I could have taken the time to build all of the furnishings for this kitchen, but I opted to save a little bit of time and buy all the 1:12 scale items that were meant for a dollhouse. I started with the floor and I cut a sheet of cardboard to match the dimensions of the floor, followed by some peel and stick scale vinyl flooring. After that had been glued in place, I experimented with potentially switching it to a little dining room instead of a kitchen, but I decided that the kitchen was the better option in the end. Like most of the rest of the stuff in this video, I didn't make the window frame from scratch either, but this video is not meant to be a tutorial on how to build miniature furniture. There are plenty of great tutorials out there. Rather, it's to give you some inspiration for the next time you feel like making a dollhouse. I checked the spacing of the items against the size of the room, and I traced out the spot where the door will go. The door is obviously just the right size, and it has a nice hinge that I wanted to use, and I flipped it around, which allowed me to hide the door behind the wallpaper, which I glued down to the wall using Mod Podge. I went with a pale green and white floral wallpaper along with the vinyl flooring to help give the kitchen a slightly more retro look, which I think contrasts the lightsabers nicely. After the wallpaper had been glued on, I cut out the shape of the door, which I will be gluing back onto the door later on. The next step was to measure out and cut the baseboards, and once those had been glued in place, I threw wallpaper on the other two walls and I installed the window. Keen-eyed viewers might have noticed that the window should be installed the other direction, but I needed space to install lights, so inward-facing it had to be. At this point, I glued all the wall sections together and I reapplied the wallpaper to the door. After that, I began adding some shelving to the walls. These shelves will help hide the secret door as well as be a place for some of the miniature things that I found in the you can probably guess it dollhouse section. These little things included a microwave, some cookbooks, a bottle of ketchup, beans, soap, eggs, and a Corningware set. For the light source behind the window, I made a little curtain of light using 2 rods at either end and then 8 filaments between. I went back and reduced the number from 8 to 3, which was more than enough. Next, I glued a frosted piece of plastic to some acrylic and I cut that out to the size of the window. And that was the last of the details needed to complete the kitchen. And the next step was to create the secret weapon room. I went and watched a few secret weapon closet scenes from different movies, and I decided to go with that timeless, expensive dark wood closet with recessed white weapon display cases lined with warm white lights look. I cut out all the wall sections that I needed from foam board using a nice sharp knife and many light passes, which helps lead to cleaner cuts. Once I knew that my walls were going to work, I began dry fitting the weapons to see what kind of space I had to work with on the board. And when I had a good idea of how I wanted the layout to look, I cut up my balsa wood wall sections accordingly. After gluing the 2 large wood panels to the foam core board, I used some thinner strips of balsa as trim to give the wall more dimension, and then I cut out the center. After that, I cut a lip into the foam of the foam core around the whole border of the case so that the filaments would be nice and hidden and out of sight. Then I gave the wood a coat of cheap wood stain so that it would look like more expensive wood. The difference between a paint and a stain is that the paint will sit on top of the wood while the stain goes in and changes the color while retaining all of the character. I then cut out 4 small walls to recess the cutout as well as a back piece where the weapons are going to sit. After soldering 4 filaments together into a nice big loop, I connected the wires to all the appropriate places, and then I tested my circuit before gluing anything together. And I didn't know what to expect, but I am very happy with the way that that looks. I then glued that back piece in place and I prepared to finish the project. You may be wondering what inspired me to pick up this project after 8 months of just letting it sit, and actually it was a conversation I had with someone who makes dioramas like this more often than I do. His name is David Miniatures. I was recently on his podcast called Scale Talk. Our conversation will be coming out in the next few weeks over there. David's been making dioramas for a long time, working on some incredible projects mainly focused around 80s and 90s shows and movies. He just started a second channel in addition to his podcast and has quite a presence on Instagram as well. You should go check out his stuff if you haven't already. After wiring up a reed switch, I ran the wires down to a battery which will sit behind the first wall and in front of the second, outside of the line of sight from the viewing angle. And here's an example of how a reed switch works. The magnet will be attached to the door, so the lights will come on or off automatically whether the door is closed or open. After completing the wiring, I rotated everything around to get a good view of the case and began getting the weapons ready to go onto the wall. Off camera, I gave each of the weapons a little bit of a metallic dry brush to help catch those edges and give them more realism, and then I glued everything in place. With that done, the last thing to do was to squeeze everything, wiring and walls included, into position and place the furniture where it needed to go. And by furniture, which is what I've been referring to it as through this whole video, I mean appliances. After all of the furniture was in place, I removed my temporary magnet which had been keeping the lights off. I closed the door, and after that, I called it good. That is it for this video. Thank you all so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Huge shout out as always to my patrons. You guys are the best. Have an awesome week, everyone. I'll see you next time.